Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this what it will be an exciting Leaders United event this morning. I see folks are slowly coming in. I think we're going to have a full virtual house today. And in the interest of time, I think I'll just kick it off and get us started. So welcome everyone. My name is Eva Margolis. I'm a program officer at United Way here, and I've recently begun staffing United Way's Leaders United space along with Jasmine Vedua. And Jasmine is here today also holding down all of the tech and making sure the event runs smoothly. So we're here today for the first of a two-part series with Nkem Ndefo, who'll be guiding us through an interactive journey into the embodied, trauma-informed, resilience-oriented approach in community-serving organizations. The second session will also be held virtually on Thursday, April 27th at the same time from 11 to 12:30 p.m. And we'll be providing this same information at the end of today's session, as well as information on how to register. That information will also be emailed out to everybody. Nkem will guide us to explore how the embodied, trauma-informed, resilience-oriented approach provides a blueprint to re-humanize organizations and improve well-being of the entire organizational ecosystem, including service providers, support staff, leadership, and the participants you serve. I have been eagerly waiting for today, and looking at the vibes in the chat here today, I think that's an indication that you all have been excitedly waiting too. So in preparing for today's journey that we're about to embark on, I'd like to just offer up a poem by Jason Bayani, who's also from California, out of the Bay Area. And this poem comes from his recent book, Locust. The poem is called Greater Joy. How little there is to know of the body, that we would emerge from the water, never a complete new. There inside is a facsimile of older grief. They say that the body inherits memory. Maybe it's just the newer pain learning to understand us through us, trauma as a wire through the generations. We are not alone in this, I repeat, then inhale, each flush of air mapping out the parts of me that remain hidden. This is a kind of practice in faith, I tell myself. On the day the coroner holds my heart in their hands, what will we call it? Out of commission parts? A collapsed engine? What becomes of the great well of ideas, all this imagination? Where does it go? I want to believe that joy is inherited too. Wouldn't they want us to have this as well? Doesn't everyone you love deserve the entirety of you? One day I'll be gone from here, and one day you will too. I grieve for you already. But I believe grief is an honest gift. It is how we learn to hold the whole of a person. So much of loss is counted inside all of the absences. There is nothing missing when it comes to any of you. It's your fullness that overwhelms me. The rich and varied life of a person, all of its requisite pleasure and madness. Maybe there's a way we learn how to live with this. Maybe we find the place that understands how to love us and our pain in equal measures. In there is a greater joy. I have to believe it is one equal to the weight of our living. Before I introduce Nkem Ndefo, just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So we are recording the lecture and large group reflection parts today, and the recording will be made available for viewing for folks that are registered, and for Leaders United folks. This recording will be emailed out later. We will not be recording any of the breakout sessions. We also have closed captions enabled. If you have any tech issues, please contact Jasmine Vedua, Operations Specialist. And on the slide here, there are two different ways. You can DM her in the Zoom chat at Meet GTCUW, or email her at jasmine.bedua@gtcuw.org. Also, the chat function is enabled. Nkem, as we go along, will be giving instruction if there's certain places within the experience today that we can use the chat. Now it's my honor to introduce Nkem. Nkem Ndefo is the founder of Lumos Transforms and creator of the Resilience Toolkit, a model that promotes embodied self-awareness and self-regulation in an ecologically sensitive framework and social justice context. I encourage you to learn more about her work at lumostransforms.com. Nkem is known for her ability to connect with people of all types by holding powerful healing spaces, weaving complex concepts into accessible narratives, and creating synergistic and collaborative learning communities that nourish people's innate capacity for healing, wellness, and connection. Originally licensed as a nurse midwife, Nkem has extensive postgraduate training in complementary health modalities and emotional therapies. She brings an abundance of experience as a clinician, educator, consultant, and community strategist to innovate programs that address trauma and inequity, build resilience, and shape liberatory change for individuals, organizations, and communities across sectors, both in her home country and internationally. Nkem is particularly interested in working alongside people most impacted by violence and marginalization. Most recently, she led a multi-year embodied diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism initiative, the Los Angeles County Department of Los Angeles County Department of Health Services. Now it's my honor and great joy to welcome Nkem Ndefo.
Thank you so much, Eva, for that warm introduction and that beautiful poem. I would love to come out of screen share. I'm a firm believer to no one needs more PowerPoint. I hope you all are doing okay with the weather. I'm here in rainy Southern California on Tovangar land, also known as Los Angeles. I like to start any convenings that I do with a little bit of what I call a connecting practice. And a connecting practice helps us connect more to ourselves, which makes us more connectable to each other, to new ideas, to learning, right? And so I hope that that is a good way to start out for us today. And so this is invitational. If something feels uncomfortable or more stressful, please stop. This is not about martyrdom. If it doesn't feel good, stop and do something you know helps connect you to yourself. So let's give this a try. I'm going to invite folks to turn your attention inwards. Eyes open, closed, whatever feels best to you. And scan your physical body for what feels the best in this moment. What sensation feels the best? It might feel open and free, warm and cozy, solid and steady. If you're carrying a lot of pain, the best might just be less pain, but something is better. Try to find that sensation and give it a little attention, noticing how widely it spreads, how deeply it runs. And as you're observing it, notice if some things are changing in your general stress level. Do your shoulders peel away from your ears? Does your breath deepen and slow? Do the thoughts come to a standstill? Can you feel your body? Thank you. Welcome again, because that sometimes will help us be, again, more connected, especially to the present moment. So I'm going to invite folks just quickly, pop in the chat. What did you notice What did you notice? What changes did you notice in yourself when you did that practice? Pop into the chat. What did you notice? What changes? And it might not have felt good. So I don't, it doesn't need to be all rose-colored glasses. But what did you notice? And this is important. I find that we have a poverty of language to describe our internal experiences. So this is a good practice for all of us. Someone noted, Jamie noticed that I was clenching my jaw. And perhaps that gave you the choice to then release it a little bit. Jessica's breathing slowed. Jen felt more present. Morgan, after the practice, I started moving in place, swaying. So there's an impulse to move, right? Beautiful. And that's a soft movement. Yeah. Susan noticed my feet were warm and cozy, which made her feel safe. How much more does our learning happen when we feel safe? Tori, I adjusted my posture with the awareness. So with awareness becomes more opportunity for choice and change. Diane, relaxing in the body, more presence, slower, deeper breathing. Notice tension in my neck and shoulders, release a little bit. So a funny thing is, when we pay attention to these positive changes, it actually amplifies the effects. And as I read them, you also probably visualize it a little bit. And each time we let a little more go and we become more connected to ourselves and each other. Beautiful, breathing slower, and Norin stretched. Thank you. So welcome again. I often use a framing that it's kind of a fun little framing when I teach. It's what, so what, and now what. And but as I thought about this, and we have 3 sessions, so we don't really get a what, so what, now what. We have to do a little. I actually am starting a little differently today. I'm starting with so what, because often, as a leader, I run an organization, a social enterprise. I know that our time is really pulled. And something really has to matter for us to get on our radar and move, right? Because there's so much that we're doing. And so I thought a so what would be important here. And then we'll do a little what at the end. And the second session will be juicy what, theory, framework, application. Okay. So just that little overarching orientation to what I'm doing here today. Because I often get asked, one of the big asks is for me to come and talk about leadership and workforce well-being. It's a big ask, right? And I get this request so often that I've really done a lot of thinking about what is wrong in our human service organizations, really in the entire ecosystem, because I work healthcare, education, social service, and not just in the United States, as well. So, but I'm really seeing cross-sector this issue, and I've come to, when there is a need for somebody like me to come give this talk, where line staff and leadership alike are burnt out and traumatized often, I ask, how did we get here? Like, what is happening? Because human services are supposed to be sites of healing, sites where people are supported, where people get well together, where the fabric, the relational fabric of society is mended. So how do we have a system, an entire ecosystem where the people providing the care and services are so burnt out and traumatized that you have to bring somebody like me to talk about things, to run a night, to float an idea, to run a program? There's this need for wellness consultants and experts, subject matter experts, for initiatives on workforce well-being, because I think we can say it's not there. Something is wrong. And COVID has been really hard and continues to be very hard. But one of its superpowers that I really appreciate, a little pandemic silver lining, is COVID's ability to spotlight. it has thrown in stark relief and shown us what is not working. All the pressures of the pandemic have borne down and continue to bear down on us, especially those of us who work with the most marginalized, the most under-resourced individuals and communities. COVID, the pandemic has shown us something is fundamentally wrong, and I believe it is time for us to interrogate how we got here. So I'm not here long with you, just 90 minutes today and 90 minutes in April. And I really hope to inspire some new thinking, some new feeling. I'm going to be asking some questions, and actually some pretty hard questions. In fact, I'm known to ask hard questions. Just because a question is hard doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking it. In fact, the hard questions are the ones we need to be asking. Just because they don't have simple answers, we need to be asking these complex and hard questions over and over again, alone and together, because this is how we will live into the answers. So some of these might be a little provocative, bear with me, okay? Because I do have like some solutionary paths, but I think solutionary paths are forged together collectively. So I can only be a piece of that. And feel free, I mean, there's going to be some dedicated time for reflection, sharing today in the whole group, and small group sharing and questions and answers. But feel free, as you feel moved, to pop something in the chat, a comment, a question, an insight. I will try. There's not that many of us here today. Yesterday, I did a session for 300 people. So I'm like, this is so cozy. It's easy to follow a chat with 78 people. So I will do my best to loop in, stay on track, and also loop things in. And I will save the chat, because if we don't get to questions today, I will be sure that we get to them in the next session. All right. So feel free to be in there. So let's dive in here. I like to use metaphors, sometimes mixed metaphors. So again, bear with me there. It's like my creative mind. But I often, and I'm a gardener, I love gardening. So this metaphor works well for me, and maybe it does for you too. If we were to grow a garden, we're planting a garden, right? We plant seeds, right? And you buy a seed packet and it says sunflowers, for example. And so you're planting your sunflowers, and you would expect sunflower plants to arise. Imagine your surprise when you see pumpkins growing. The thought is, oh, this package must have been mislabeled. These were actually pumpkin seeds. They were not sunflower seeds. I think about values as seeds, because values are fundamental. Values are the basis for our behavior, and they guide our decision-making. So when you plant a seed of a value, let's say innovation, that's your value, right? Innovation. In your organization, the people and the programs will be centered around innovation. Innovation will be prioritized in funding and resource allocation, because that's your seed. If it's compassion or teamwork, those values will be seeded everywhere, and you'll see them throughout the organization. And what are other common organizational values? You can pop some in the chat. The values on your wall, the values on your impact reports, the values on your website, right? Integrity. I was literally going to say excellent, Renal. You are psychic. We're right on the same page. Collaboration, maybe. Look at that one came right there too. Transparency, community voice, psychological safety, equity, agility, diversity. Stewardship is on my list. Dignity, respect. Wow, we are just in sync. I'm like saying dignity, dignity pops in the chat. I'm loving this. Okay. Empathy. So look at these beautiful values. They're pretty, both Ramonia and Tori, empathy at the same time. So if human service organizations planted these seeds, we would expect to see programs, people, organizational culture, policy, practice infused with these values, where everyone would be thriving and working well together in shared vision, respectful, caring. Yeah. So remember how I started with how much burnout people are experiencing? How much trauma, secondary vicarious trauma people are feeling? Compassion fatigue. So what's the disconnect? Something's going on in the seeds. And yes, seeds go in soil, okay? And soil is affected, like also fertilizer, the nutrients that are there, the water, right? But if we know if the soil lacks nutrients, we amend the missing ingredients. If it's dry, we water it. And we already talk in the human service landscape, the ecosystem, we already talk about that. That's funding and resourcing. That is the nutrients, right? Funding and resourcing, everybody's like, okay, we all talk about that. But what I actually don't think is happening is that we're not looking at the seeds that have been planted. Because if we are seeing pumpkins grow, if we are seeing burnout grow, there is something we planted inadvertently. Something is growing, a weed perhaps, that is creating that burnout. Something is impacting the well-being of our workers and leaders, that the seeds that are actually growing and stealing fertilizer and stealing water are not all the ones that are on the website or on the wall. We are planting other seeds that directly grow the type of system we have now. And I believe that there are 4 big seeds that are planted: compliance, production, individualization, and disconnection. And some of these, I want to be clear. Let's talk about compliance. The energy of compliance is not the same as the energy of agreement. Yeah. Carrie adds here in the chat, soil is also climate and culture, the essence that is often more difficult to name. So when there is compliance, and there can be compliance for all kinds of reasons, regulatory frameworks, right? Statutes, funding mandates. I know we're here with a funder, but funding mandates create compliance. I told you I was going to be asking some spicy questions. Force and domination, control, compliance is control. How is that compatible with the collaboration and consent? There's some fundamental tensions between those two processes. Production, the value of production. How much can we squeeze out of people? The volume, the efficiency, the bottom line. And even if that is coming from, we want to have a maximum impact, which is a very altruistic goal, it still is heavy production. And it squeezes the workforce. It squeezes the leadership. And individualization and disconnection from ourselves and from each other. And this is culture-wide. This is not a surprise, right? Where we individualize, and you can see this, for example, if your organization has an individual approach to self-care or a collective care, right? Does your organization make time for people to connect? It takes a moment. Like at the beginning of this, I did a connecting practice. It took us a moment to self-connect. Where is that built into the structure? Where is there time for people to connect as people, not just what on the project that they're pushing forward, on the service that's being provided, right? If the value, right, is community, connection, right? Where is the time for that, right? And I think it was Dr. King Jr., the Reverend Dr. King, who said, budgets are a moral document. I would add budgets and calendars are a moral document. Look at your calendars, look at your budget, and this will tell you in a great deal where the values are. Yeah, weeds come from seeds. And if you didn't weed your garden, they are growing and they are stealing the nutrients. And I have to say here, people, we get into human services to care, right? Because we care. And I actually believe that the systems take advantage of workforce and leadership's altruism, because they know this is not a job for us. This is a calling. This is this is heart work for us. And because people are willing to go above and beyond for heart work, the system will squeeze more production and can get more production from people who are motivated by altruism. And when this happens system-wide, it is not unique to your region. Again, I work in lots of regions. There is a problem. So just pause. I'm actually going to build in a little moment for connection here. What's actually happening inside of you as I'm saying these things, right? Is it resonating? Are you busy multitasking, doing emails? Right? You're so busy doing emails and answering things that you can't even have the time. Point well taken, right? Yeah. Does it feel uncomfortable? Do we feel a little called out or called in? Like this is too much? Yeah. So I see you're already going, affirming, a tiny little fire feels lit inside. Yeah. Confirmation, resonating, what my team might need. Okay. Yes, systems take advantage of workers and leaders' altruism, both. Karen says this resonates deeply. So first, what needs to happen here? We need to get really clear about what seeds are here, the intentional ones and the unintentional ones. And as somebody said, where was it? Weeds are only weeds if they're unwanted plants. Yes, it's like I call them a volunteer. Sometimes you can get a lovely volunteer in your garden. You're like, oh, look at where did you come from? But sometimes not so much. The question is, are you interrogating? Are you looking? Right? Are you looking? Julia says it feels affirming, but still so much bigger than I can control at my level. I'm on the now what, right? Already on the now what. We're going to get there. As I said, this is the so what. We're going to get to the now what. So I'm just going to ask a series of questions here, and we're going to return to these questions at the very end. But just, again, some provocative things to get you here. Do we have the will to find those hidden seeds and disinter them, to uproot them? What do we need to do this? And I'm going to say, for example, the DEI commitments that everybody made from the summer of racial reckoning, are they as firm? Is work actually progressing with your, right? Are you actually progressing with your policies and procedures? Have you done internal cultural transformation? How are you measuring this? Who's doing the measuring? That's one way to know if that seed that you planted in the summer of racial reckoning is really being nurtured. Yeah. 2, are the values you have on your wall and on your website, are they enough? Do you need new values? What seeds do you want to plant intentionally that might be missing? Are you having values conversations with your leadership teams, with your staff, with all of your stakeholders? Nothing about us without us. The people who you are serving, are they considered in the values conversation? Are they part of your strategic planning process? 3, how will we embody our chosen values? Values are connected to culture, and culture is not enacted by policy alone. Getting back to that invisible essence that somebody commented about. I'm sorry, I forget your name. I'm trying, but it's a lot to remember there. So culture is not enacted by policy alone. Where is the internal transformation happening? So I do believe that values centering can be a potent antidote to burnout. Connection to values is actually a known resilience determinant from the literature. But I personally don't believe it's enough. I don't believe value centering is enough. As much as I've been going on and on about it, it's not enough. I don't think policies are enough either, because who enacts policies? People. And if people are disconnected from values, or if they're carrying anxiety and trauma and burnout, they're going to carry that right into the policy implementation. You can have the best. I mean, I've worked with organizations beautiful on paper, and I'm like, what's happening? What's missing? I think the internal work of transformation is often neglected, especially by human service leadership, for many reasons. And I'm a leader, so I'm like, this is a little bit of a peer combo here. And I believe leadership comes in many ways. There's formal leadership by title and role, and there's informal leadership by social capital. We know who leaders are in our organizations, formal and informal. But it's often neglected. Why? Lack of resources. And the biggest one, I actually don't believe is money. I believe it's time. There's just not enough time. Sometimes a lack of will, depending on what's going on. It is often easier to focus out there than in here. And I'm going to say something, again, I'm known to say some of the hard things, but part of saying the hard things, if we can't tell the truth, nothing is going to change. We are hurtling towards climate collapse. We are in a 4th year of a pandemic. If we can't tell the truth about what's happening now, I don't know what we're waiting for. I really don't know what we're waiting for. So tell the truth, resource up so we can face it. That's my attitude. Tell the truth, resource up, do so we can face it, and face it together. It's much easier, right? As Ava so nicely introduced, I'm trained as a nurse midwife. I always think about accompaniment. And I chose to be a midwife and not a physician because as a midwife, I never delivered babies other than my own two. I always attended births. I was interested in fortifying the strength in the birthing person to do this incredible feat. And I believe it is in with all of us. So let's go. Let's go. So here comes a little hard one. Many people in human services are driven to help because we are outrunning our own powerlessness. Spicy. Powerlessness, helplessness, out of controlness is a core feature of almost all trauma. Doesn't matter the type or the flavor, individual in your life, relational, developmental, transgenerational. And so many of us, in response to that trauma of feeling powerless, especially in the face of suffering. I can speak for myself. Making impact is the way that I outrun my own powerlessness. I am trying to outrun my own trauma. And it causes me to move, right? Move. I've always wondered why it's so hard to get people in human services to do self-care, because in self-care, we've got to stop and face ourselves, which means we've got to stop and feel our own powerlessness in face of some pretty big things in the world. And that takes us back to our own traumas that are more or less healed. And so we stay busy. We make impact, and it's important. This is not an either or conversation. This is a both and. Okay. And so we're running into burnout, and it's much easier. It's not that we don't want to center the values of compassion and collaboration, but when I'm moving 1,000,000 miles a second and I need to slowing down to listen and collaborate, it means I also have to slow down and listen to myself. Oops, ouch. So a survival response makes it very hard to center values. Right? And we generally look at trauma. When we look at trauma responses, we see people in substance abuse. We see people acting out in violence, helping. Right? Really, when we are obsessive about helping, about making impact, it is often also a trauma response. It has some nice benefits, but it has some drawbacks too if we don't name what's happening. Because in our hurry, in our fight, in our struggle, because we're in that state, we will replicate that internal state in our organization, especially if you're a leader. You will replicate it in your policies. Your hurry. In fact, I was last week in some collaboration with some folks in London, and someone used a term, and I'm loving it now, the urgentocracy. If the urgentocracy lives inside of you, you bet your policies, procedures, and practices in your organization will manifest that urgentocracy. And there your values go out the window. And guess what? Urgency is actually your hidden value seed that is getting so much energy, so much water, so much fertilizer. So the focus is it's not to take the focus off the impact, it's to balance this out and come inwards too. We need that internal transformation. We cannot hope to embody values without this. And internal transformation requires us to turn inwards, a resilience to live our values, even in the face of obstacles. When time is tight, and it is, to slow down, turn inwards, connect to ourselves, to allow the deep connection with our colleagues and stakeholders that is needed for collaboratory, transformative work, for the impact we all long for. Yeah. So you can see how I'm building up a so what. Carrie adds here, urgency is also a tenet of white supremacy. I'm going to say it's more than supremacy. Supremacy, all the different supremacies, and the culture of, we're in late stage capitalism, which is about production. Time is money, y'all. One of the ways, when you're tired, what do we do in this culture? We caffeinate. We don't rest. That will tell you what the value is. What do you do when you're tired? You caffeinate, you don't rest. Yeah. Julia says, we lead by example when we don't notice. Example, when we don't take vacation, we set that as a value. It generates guilt when our teammates do take time off. We keep working, says Suyapa. Okay. Oh boy, I went really deep there. I'd like to invite you into an individual reflection. Now, we're going to take some time to connect. And reflection can be thinking and journaling, feeling and journaling. Maybe you can doodle. I love when people doodle. Lots of you have your cameras off. Maybe you close your door in your office, or you're working from home and you get up and you move your body, or you're a musician. You can reflect in so many different ways. This is what I'd like you to reflect on. And then we're going to go into some small groups to have some discussion about it. I'm going to put it in the chat and also read it. What would be different in your if your organization fully embodied its stated values? What would be different for leadership, for line staff, the people you serve? What obstacles prevent your organization from fully living its values? And what supports your organizations to live its values? So we're just going to do about 4 minutes or so. So you're just going to just barely touch the surface. And then when you get into group, there'll be more reflection collectively. Okay, so I'm going to set a little timer. Welcome back, everybody. So just notice for a second what just happened. You went from a small group to this big group, and now there's lots of faces, and that might be a little disorienting. So just notice in yourself, slow down. Ooh. Right? Do you need anything right now? Remember, we did that resourcing practice at the beginning of like what feels best in your body that just helps you like reorient. Zoom is disorienting, and I think we don't pay attention that like this rapid change. So I'm super curious and would love to invite some of the highlights, some of the learnings from your group shares, reminding folks to please speak from your own experience unless your group member gave you explicit consent to share their story. You can say your experience of hearing someone's story, but let them tell their story. So just that little caveat. If you want to pop it in the chat, if you'd like to raise your hand digitally with the ribbon at the bottom under reactions, bring you up and spotlight you and hear your experience, your learnings from this conversation. Who's going to be brave and take some space? In the chat. All right, Katie, let's spotlight you up. And let's hear.
Okay. We had great conversation, I felt, in our group, and some of it was interesting. And just reflecting on your point earlier of the individualization and thinking about like as an organization, you can think of it through that lens. Like if our org does these things, you're doing it as an individual organization, and how our system isn't designed to support like this living to our values. Maybe that's an excuse, and I can hear that, and I'm reflecting on that. But I think about, there's a lot of risk in living to these pieces, which could actually mean losing your business. And so I think there's a very real side of this of like, how can you do this and maintain your business, especially when part of your business is relying on customers externally and that aren't in maybe human service type work, or what, they just want a service and they pay for that service and they want it. So I think, again, going back to the capitalism is really highlighting like the theme of all of this. And towards the end, we were talking about a specific example of this week, this snowstorm, all these experts giving this prediction of this snow coming. We're all being told to stay inside. We're all being told, everything's getting closed and canceled. And it's so stressful. Our org is under stress trying to make these decisions. Do you close childcare? Do you close your fitness memberships or fitness facilities? Do you stop having your youth programs because it's under the advice of sheltering in place, essentially? But how we don't actually have like a social system in place. We don't live in a social welfare state that would like pay for all these people to stay at home, or provide reimbursement for maybe a service that was paid for or whatever it is. And so how difficult it is to make these decisions as an individual organization in a society when we're being told this thing. So I just feel like this week is a really great reflection of how difficult it is to actually hibernate because it's winter and winter is doing what winter does.
Without
sacrificing your business.
What the need for larger change, right? So what is possible is really constrained. There's constraints outside of you.
Yeah.
Huge constraints. Huge constraints as obstacles. Okay. Good awareness, right? And that's like, I think about what kind of creativity we can have, what kind of solutions generative together. All right. Thank you so much, Katie, for your bravery. I see Julia has put in the chat, how do we do this when capitalism is designed to prevent us from it? And really shouting out great points, Katie. Yeah. Well, we're all in the same boat together, right? Anyone else? What learnings, what highlights came from your discussion? What was similar? What might have been different? Who's going to be brave? Julia.
So I noticed that we all want to do these things. Like we actually do value them, and it's like trying to figure out how do we do this in the setting that we have. Someone brought up a great point with when we have transitions in leadership and we lose people with certain values or certain ways of enacting those. How do we like bring that energy back in without trying to mold that person into the other person? So yeah, those kind of transitions and trying to figure out how do we were really centering how do we uplift the people, our teammates that were, that are subordinates in the structure, because we wouldn't be here without them. So what is our purpose in that sense, and how do we bring them into the conversation?
So great. So sounds like acknowledging that there are power hierarchies, and how do you work across power hierarchies to bring into a more collaborative spirit. I do find it's very interesting. You might have like a big change maker comes in an organization and they do initiative, but it's not institutionalized, and they leave, and all the learning just goes right with them. Right? So what does it mean to make change durable? What does it look like to make it durable, right? But not calcified, not concretized, but durable and responsive. Great. Thank you so much, Julia. Anyone else? Would anybody else like to share what came out of there? Maybe it's a learning, an aha, a frustration.
I can jump in. This is Phoebe.
Hi, Phoebe.
Hello. I think something that really resonated is this idea of like, if we were really living out our values, we might actually serve fewer people with the same resources, and or we could serve more people, but we need a lot more resources instead of really always trying to do more to get the same amount of funding, to do new things, to do more things. Yeah, that really resonated with me.
It's very interesting, right? So the idea of more, bigger, better, right? But with the same stretches you. And what would happen if we backed off and did what we did well?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Phoebe. That's very insightful. Stepping off the urgentocracy. But there are things that are urgent. And I mean, this is, I think, one of the benefits of having been a midwife. Like I've been with people who are literally bleeding or to death, or who are not breathing. And so having that perspective about what kind of urgency are we talking about? Because we create in our urgentocracy false urgencies. And then, everything's a priority, nothing's a priority anymore. Yeah. And I'm going to shout out to the funders in the room about creating false urgencies. I told you I was going to ask a hard question. See lots of folks nodding their heads, right? Funder created crisis that didn't have to be there. Yeah. And there it is. Gay saying more, bigger, better, and new is also driven by funders. So we want innovative new programs, but we're not doing capacity building funding for you to, we want you to deliver, my favorite is we want you to deliver a trauma-informed program, but we're not going to provide capacity building so you can have trauma-informed organizational change. Yeah. Mission creep, Julia's talking about, right? Right, that would pull us off your values. Looks like someone else just unmuted. Yeah.
Yep, this is Jessica. I just wanted to say that one thing I've been doing at site visits is talking to funders about allocating funds for healing for staff, frontline staff, especially after the past couple of years, because most of us sitting here, we did not stop working during that time. We did not stop engaging. We work with foster youth, 14 to 25, and they needed us more than ever during the double pandemic. And I wanted to thank United Way. They allocated funds for the Culturally Powered Communities grantees to get, I think it was like $10,000 just to allocate towards healing for our team. And so I think a lot more of that needs to happen within foundations, to just allocate a certain amount of dollars, like, yes, you can have this, but you have to use this amount of money for healing for your team. I think that's super important, especially now.
Thank you. And that's beautiful. And leadership. Leadership is often left out of that because it's out there, right? So again, but it's a both and. Morgan shares in the chat. Kim said something inspiring in our group, and I hope I can share here. What would be different if we lived our values? The conversations that are hard to have wouldn't be so hard to have. Woo! That, I have chills. Yeah. And you got a shout out, 100 emoji, one of my more favorite ones. So I want to talk a little bit about the solutionary path. I do not have enough humility to know there's many. This is just the one that I've found in doing the work, but there's many solutionary paths, thank goodness. I use what's called an embodied trauma-informed, resilience-oriented. I don't just say trauma-informed because I think it overweights the trauma and underweights the recovery and the resilience. So I call it TIRO, T-I-R-O, trauma-informed, resilience-oriented, but it's embodied. And I feel like this has really been a way to counter problems here. And because TIRO approach actually is a value-centered approach to use those values in decision-making and in complex situations. So for those of you that have had trauma-informed training, you may remember the values from SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, that were sort of set out as the core from behavioral health, the core trauma-informed values. I've tweaked them a little bit over the years and various different work, but I think they're pretty lovely. Safety, trustworthiness and transparency, collaboration and mutuality, voice, choice, and self-agency, peer support, and cultural humility. It's a cluster of six clusters. So you can't make these values, particularly trust and safety, and which underlie, like, it's hard to collaborate if you don't feel safer. It doesn't have to be ultimate safety, but safer, right? It's hard to trust if you don't feel safer. When you trust, you start to feel safer. Transparency, they feed each other, but particularly safety and trustworthiness, you cannot make those in your heads. When somebody says, trust me, it's immediately like a red flag for me, like, show me, right? Like, what? Right? So trust and safety live in our bodies. So we can't just do this from our heads. It has to be a whole body experience, right? Which means we need to be able, all of us, because when we, to be able to face the stressors, to be able to face the traumas, to be able to have the resilience, to feel the hard feelings and stay connected. And so this is my plea for an embodied TIRO approach. So I was asked to lead an anti-racism initiative for LA County Department of Health Services, right? So this is the second largest safety net health system in the country. Serves 750,000 patients annually, a workforce upwards of 30K, including all the residents, 4 hospitals, 3 medical schools, 26 clinics, all of the healthcare in the jails and probation camps, the largest emergency medical EMS system in the country, huge. And I said, I will only do it if on 3 conditions. 1, community and patients are involved from the beginning. It was a strategic planning process. 2, that we use the embodied TIRO approach. And 3, that leadership, executive leadership, this is like a $7 billion annual budget for this place, that they do embodied resilience work, because if we have so much trauma around racism, right? On all sides. So people come into the conversations like this, defensive. How are you able to write policy if you can't even talk about it? And they agreed, and we did it. And we did something. I remember early on talking about love as a value, and people were like, healthcare, love, what? What are you talking about? That's like grounds for like an HR complaint, right? Like that's harassment. And it felt really, really radical. And I don't know why it's so radical to put a bid in for love. Because what is love if not the TIRO values, right? Safety, trust, collaboration, cultural humility, voice, choice, self-agency, that peer support. I think about, and I often, Bell Hooks, the author, the Black feminist author, if you're not familiar with her, who wrote about love as a love ethic. And that just wasn't the sappy and romantic kind of love. That is the kind of love, like civic love, how you show up in justice, right? How you show up for your siblings, how you show up in all places. And so I'm going to put this, I just love this quote from, two quotes from Bell Hooks that I'm going to put in the chat. Embracing a love ethic means that we utilize all dimensions of love: care, commitment, trust, responsibility, respect, and knowledge in our everyday lives. And this one, when we choose to love, we choose to move against fear, against alienation and separation. The choice to love is a choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other. So we went with this organization as an example that had, I talked about its voluminous size and scope and across geography. LA County is 88 cities, 10.5 million people, right, served, right? They wanted originally to have a strategic planning group of 17 people. And I said, I don't know how you're going to represent this scope. And instead, we advocated and got strategic planning groups, 14 strategic planning groups, one for each facility and the clinic system, one for the jails and probation camps, one for each affinity group: Black, Latinx, LGBTQ, disabled, women's. We did listening sessions out into the community, dozens and dozens of listening sessions with workforce, with patients. That actually started the strategic planning process. Not at the end, like we have a strategic plan here, do you like it? Rubber stamp. Their priorities formed the basis of the strategic planning process, including the development of the values. And through all of that process, right, shepherding that whole process, out of the 10 values that they chose at the end, one was love. And they knew they were so far away from it. It was aspirational, but it was something that they wanted to aspire to, so that this health system could be a site of healing, not just for patients, but also for the people that work there. So when we connect in this way, it's us in the people we serve, us in our colleagues. It's that South African concept of Ubuntu. I am only because you are. We are interdependent. And when we center this, right, love in this way, or this kind of value, our self-care actually becomes participant and client care. It becomes collegial care. It becomes collective care. And in every decision we make, we actually center love as a value and our own mutual well-being. The people you serve cannot be well until the people who do the serving are well, and vice versa. So next, this was the big so what, right? Next time, I'm actually going to talk about how embodied TIRO is perhaps different than traditional, if you've done traditional trauma-informed training before. Some of the goals, the framework, the implementation. I particularly like micro value implementation, which can start right away, because I hear, we are all dealing with structural constraints that are, just so, I don't even know the word. I just feel like this sense of such pressure and, by these structural constraints, but how micro value integration, implementation in change processes accelerates, and the embodiment of the values, not just as an outcome, but in the process. Like, you don't get to equity without practicing equity. You don't get to collaboration without practicing collaboration. So I'm excited to talk about that, and also about the embodied resilience piece, right? What helps us as leaders, as workforce, to be able to safely turn inwards, to come out of the urgentocracy and restore that relational fabric and that when we come out of that urgency, it's actually when we settle and connect, it unlocks all kinds of creative genius in us and between us. So I have some questions for you and I'll ask in the follow-up email when the link to the video is sent out, is these questions, which I asked midway through, for you to ponder over the next couple of months until we meet again, about your values. Do you have the will to do this, right? Do you need different values? How are you embodying values? And just even, these are hard questions, but even if they're just like floating in your mind, you move a little differently. Okay. I know I'm supposed to hand it over. Before I hand it over for the closeout, I'm a couple minutes over, I just want to invite folks to pop into the chat. What are you taking away from our time here together? We've been together for 90 minutes, almost. Is it an idea, a hope, a commitment, a feeling, a doubt, a worry? Maybe you're still processing. Pop it in the chat. What are you taking from our time together? And that we will all take a moment to read it. And I would really love if at least that part of the chat could go out in the email, so that we can hold what we're taking away together. We can hold it together. Hope and inspiration, feeling loved, hope, validation. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to pass it over to our intrepid support team, Eva and Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Nkem, and thank you all. I know someone had put it in the chat earlier that they were feeling open right now. I'm just feeling open and ever so grateful. Before we close out, wanted to give a special thanks to the Leaders United Advisory Group, Fartun, Jessica, Kelly, Kristen, Lisa, and Shelley. Thank you all for your guidance on the content and the context for the Leaders United convenings. We will be joining back together for session 2 on Thursday, April 27th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. There will be a separate, Jasmine just dropped the link, the registration link in the chat. The same registration link is also going to go out via email. So please sign up. You'll have to register separately for the event, and put this date down in your calendars when we convene again. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have an amazing rest of the day. Thank you.